Okay, this part could be a little bit more complex. If you have, yeah, any problems with it, you can just review my code and check if you, yeah, can understand it by that. But we will go step by step over it, and I hope you can understand it. Okay, what we now want is that we have a service that allows us to have all our data into it. We firstly will create a service here. I think we can put it inside of this shared services and make a subfolder data. And in this one, we will create a new service which is named weather data. So this will create a new service that is provided in root, which is exactly what we want. So now we want to adjust our data that we have currently in the weather card to be in this service. We, for the moment, only will copy that one and will make the imports that are necessary. If you're already familiar with services, you can kind of try to get this data from the service. The thing that we will now do is making a kind of store, which means we will make an object that containing all our data and then will be provided to the specific components when they are getted from our app component, or in that case, like the main page. What we have to do for that is to thinking about what every card should represent. We will here make a weather forecast store. That's a normal signal. And that one will be a specific type. Every location that we will have an own sub-object in it, which means what we can do to make it later also easier to get all locations that we have added to our cards, we make an object that have a location key from type string, and this one will contain a location as we have it here with weather location and a weather data, which will contain our forecast weather view data. So of course we have to give this as a type, which means we have to close this one and creating this one. So what we now will do is doing exactly or using the same data as we have it here, which means we will make an object for Chicago, and we will then use the data that we already have here, location, with our location part of the data and also the weather data, which will be this object. What I have adjusted is that we have an array. The reason for that is that we later want to have multiple data sets of that one. The first one will be representing our header of the card, which represents the weather and the temperature of today. And we have later the data for the forecasts. We will make forecasts for 5 days. And with this, we will have an array that allows us to inserting specific data sets and then can show the forecast for all of them. Okay. Now we want to adjust our main page to using that data. Here we have, as you can see, like the location search and the weather card. So for that, we will make a computed value. And yeah, when I'm finished with the service, you can then start to try to get it working. But I think at the moment it's nice that you have a good base. Computed. This computed value will be like a list of countries or locations we have added, which means we will return object.keys of our weather forecast store. With this, we get a list, an array of, in that example, with one object Chicago, and that allows us to have an array that we can iterate through to make multiple cards for each location we have in the store. Okay, that means we can make here a for loop. We're firstly using our service with using it here, weather data store. Or weather data service. I think that could be the better name, yeah. And we want to get now the data we have prepared for that. Alternatively, that's something that is a little bit newer, is the weather data service by inject this service instance. That helps you to not need a constructor all the way. You can then inserting that one from Angular, and then you have the service here, and yeah, can completely run everything without need any callback functions or like life cycle hooks. Here we make a new object, forecast weather locations, and then using here this dot weather service dot saved weather forecast keys. Ready to learn Angular 19, 20 and 21. This course covers everything new in this latest versions. From hydration, event replay, resource API, signal forms, we cover it all. You will get a complete playground app showcasing all features. Plus, we will build a weather app from scratch to implement everything hands-on. Full source code for both projects included. Check the link in the description. Here I directly inserting that signal. That's the reason why I'm not calling it. I can call it, but the problem is that we then have it only once. Because if you're calling it, it gets the current value and then it's finished. But we want to get all changes transmitted when we adjusting our store later. Okay, let us now iterate through that one by making here one of the new ways to make iterations. Here we will use our signal, our computed signal that we have created. And here we will use location. And at the end, so let us quickly format that one for us. Okay. When we now have this one, you can see that for every location we're creating a card, which means we should at least have one. If we would copy that one, only as an example, and then name it Chicago 2, we will have two cards, which means we have now a connection between our data storage and the amount of elements we will have. So what we now need is a second function, and that's really something that you can like easily make wrong if you are new with this. We make a function that allows us to get the data for a location. Because at the moment we have this array with location keys, but we need a way to get the specific data when we go deeper into the card, which means we will here have a function like location name string, and this one will return us the specific key that we have defined, that example location name. But now the problem could start, because we're returning an object from a signal, and what happens then, it will not copying it, it will let it exactly stay the same reference. And if we later, like using that data to do some manipulations, that could lead to issues, because without copying that object, you giving the card the ability to change our data behind the scenes. And that's something we don't want. We want always to have a store that stays the same and are controlled by our service. What we are doing for that one is to make a copy of it. This is named a deep copy, because what it does, it converting our object into a string, and then it passes it back to an object, which means we completely copy the data that we're providing here without have any references back to the original. And that's very important, because with this, every service or every component that using that function to get its data get a copy of the element and not get the reference to adjust our store behind the scenes. Okay, let us continue with the weather card. At the moment we don't have an input here. We now need an input. Here, as you can see, we need again the weather forecast, day forecast, and we need the weather location. We will create again both of them by making input required with the matching weather forecast. Oh no, wait a second, that one getting our key. That's all that it gets in the first place, which means this one get only a string. Okay, with this set, you can of course now try to adjust the components on your own to understand how everything works together. You have this function in the service that allows you to get the data as a signal. Now, as a with a function call, you can get the data now, and you can then try to spread that data down to the different components that we have. If you want to only follow the course, you can of course look further, and whenever you felt ready, you can then start with working on your own to try to get the data down to the different components. Okay. Now, what we want to do is, that's now the weather key. So, what we now can do is we get again, as before, we get the weather data service by using the inject function from Angular. Weather data service. That thing has to be imported again. And what we now will do, we have to call that function. The trick that we can now use is we get the weather data by using a computed. And that's something you have to learn over the time when you use that component computed or signals in specific use cases. In our case, this computed will use our function to get the forecast data for location of the specific weather key. Which means each time this weather key changes, it will get the data again. That's the main purpose of this computed. Which means each time we're providing a weather key, it will get that data to a signal. Can a little bit clean up that stuff here. Okay. What we now will do is, because we have that data now, we can now split that data because this object now, if we're calling it as a computed, okay, currently it's not typed correctly. We will type this one. As you can see, the problem here is that because of our deep copy, it will not know the type because this parse has a return type of any, which means we have to provide the function what is to be expected as an output. In this way, we will here defining how the object would look like. We can use the type as we have used it here, because that's the return type. So like that one. And now we can do this and getting here the weather data. Here the location. And here again the weather data. Weather data. So as you can see, it now has a problem because our data set is an array and the object expecting one element, which means we will firstly go with an get element 0 until we reach the point where we have more data. Okay. Now, because we have defined it, this needs a weather key, which we will provide with this location of our for loop. And as you can see now, we have the data set with all our data that comes from the store. When we now check it out, we can go in our state and adjust some data to see that it is used by this component. Yeah, and so on. The important thing to understand is why this thing kind of works is because we're here using the signal value to get a location, but each time we're adjusting the store, it knows what has changed in the store. And with this, we can later make some functions that allows us to change the data, and we get the updates then in the UI. The next part will be then one of the more interesting parts because we will like configure the APIs that we need that you can then make the data be real.